Going back to my Oklahoma roots in this short story, published by Twenty Bellows in their latest anthology, EMBERS, we are the West. What the wind says. Zeb's cheek was wet against the warm planks of the front porch. The heavy hand of the sun pressed against his head, leaving his hair slicked down on his forehead. The peeling paint scratched at his skin, but he didn't move. His left hand was cupped over his free ear, but the effort to block his parents' voices was half-hearted. He tucked his knees under his chin, trying to make himself invisible between the hard-packed earth and the porch. "Susan, we can't put this off any longer. He has to go." Overhead, Grandma's wind chimes jangled in the prairie wind that never stopped blowing. Mama's words were caught up in the discordant melody snatched out of Zeb's hearing. "I know you thought you could, but you can't," Daddy said. "You did your best. He'll understand. Whatever's left of him." This time Mama's response was clear. She sounded strangled. Zeb could picture her wrapping her pajama top around and around in her raw-boned fists. "How can he understand if I don't?" Zeb strained, but he did not hear Daddy's response. Zeb had been trying to be a big boy and say Dad out loud, but in his head it still always came out as Daddy. He sighed deeply, dropped the pretense of not eavesdropping, and stared at his dirty sneakers. The smell had woken him this morning, as it did more and more often. He'd lain under the sheets, his belly tight, his eyes screwed shut. It was Saturday. Mama worked hard to get it cleaned up on the days Daddy worked so he wouldn't know, but it was Saturday. Zeb had listened to the quiet steps of his mother, her murmured reassurances barely reaching him through his closed bedroom door. He could hear Grandpa's confused, apologetic responses. He knew his slight mother would be struggling to lift her father into the bathtub without waking her husband, to clean the filth from him, to keep him from slipping or falling before she could pull the sheets off the bed and remake it with the fresh ones she always had waiting. But if Zeb listened for the soft footfalls of his mother everywhere in the house, so did his father. Daddy's steps came next, the soft swearing, the strike of a fist on the wall. Zeb did not stir. He knew Daddy's anger was empty. He heard his mother and father collide in the hall and knew that Daddy had already unmade the bed and was helping Mama with the sheets. But Mama didn't say thank you. Mama was crying. Zeb waited till he heard the washing machine start and slipped out of his room, out the rickety screen door, and slid down beside the porch floor to listen to their voices and the call of the summer sunshine in the dawn wind. Mama again. "I don't mind. I don't mind, please." Zeb shook his head, propelled to his feet. Mama didn't beg. Daddy didn't make her beg. Until Grandpa had come to live here, Zeb had never even heard them argue. He ran, his feet striking the hard-packed dirt and asphalt that patched their road together. He ran, his breath catching and whooshing out without rhythm. He ran, his eyes fixed on the big metal rail gate ahead. Cold steel under his palms, his legs swinging up and over. Landing in the waist-high weeds, the tracks of the cattle truck barely visible through the dusty yellow field. He wasn't allowed out here alone. Mama took him for walks sometimes, but he sneaked out here all the time. He thought she knew. He thought as long as he pretended to sneak, she pretended not to know. Zeb strode along the deeply notched ruts, wondering how many weeks had passed since the ground was soft enough to feel the impression of the heavy trucks that rattled through here. He could not remember the last rain. The weeds brushed against his bare calves, goat heads tangling in his laces, as if to slow him down. "Sammy," he called, trying to keep his voice low and steady. "Sammy, here, kitty, kitty." He smiled in spite of himself, as he always did when he called her name. He didn't know why he was so contrary, as Mama said. She had thought it was preposterous for Zeb to give the cat a boy's name, but he could not be swayed. Mama had been there, exploring the creek beds with him when he'd found her. There'd been no doubt of the yellow cat's sex then, heavy and sway-backed with pregnancy as she was. Zeb had known by the furrow between Mama's brows and the tightness of her lips that she was angry. "Somebody dumped her," she said. "Left the poor thing out here so they wouldn't have to deal with her litter." "Mama, can we take her home, please? Please?" Zeb had pleaded, his fingers already deep in the cat's fur as she purred and rubbed her body along his legs. Mama had sighed, that furrow deepening. "No, Zeb, there's just no point, baby. She'll run off and hide somewhere to have this litter anyway. She might seem friendly now, but that isn't the same as trusting us with her babies." Zeb had been horrified by Mama's callousness. "But Mama, she has nowhere to go. She'll starve out here, or the coyotes will get her." "Yes, those things might happen," Mama admitted. Before Mama could stop him, Zeb had reached down and scooped the cat into his arms, ready to dash off with her and run for home. The cat had twisted in his arms, dug her claws deep into his forearm, and leaped out of his grasp. She landed with her tail in the air, her eyes fixed on the boy, and she hissed. But she did not run. Zeb had rubbed gingerly at his arm and then crouched down as slowly as he could. The wild faded out of the cat's eyes. She crept forward, step by step, then nuzzled her rough head under Zeb's outstretched palm. "Mama, we can't let her die out here." Mama's gaze had caught the small trickle of blood on Zeb's forearm, but he saw the surrender in her eyes. She shrugged, smiled a strange smile, and suddenly dropped cross-legged to the ground. "All right, then. I'll stay here with your cat. You go get some food. Maybe a couple of old towels." That was the month before Grandpa came to stay with them, back when they had old towels lying around the house. Zeb beamed and turned to run, but his mother's voice called him back. "I'm going to be stuck out here with this critter for a while. What should I call her if we decide to start a chat?" He'd known instantly. "Sammy," he called back over his shoulder. "Her name is Sammy." After that, he'd been out here almost every day. Sammy always greeted him like an old friend, but if he tried to pick her up, she became a wild thing in his arms. Mama tried to explain that the cat had to guard her unborn litter above everything else, but Zeb hadn't understood. "I'd never hurt her. Doesn't she know that?" "No," Mama had replied simply. And that had been that. Then one day Zeb had gone looking for Sammy, and she hadn't answered his call. Not even when he rattled the bag of cat food Daddy had brought home. He'd hunted up and down the dried-out creek bed, under old stumps, inside her little towel-lined den. Sammy had been nowhere to be found. Mama told him not to worry, and 3 weeks later, Sammy finally reappeared. She was perilously thin, her coat ragged, her ear torn. Zeb had known as soon as he saw her that her litter was gone. Coyote, fox, badger, who knew? Maybe they'd just been sickly. Sammy hadn't seemed the same, but hungrily she devoured the food they brought her. Together they sat a long time in the comfort of the tall grasses, her bony chest rising and falling under Zeb's hand, her always wary eyes closed. Zeb stayed as long as he dared, watching the sun drift lower and lower toward the horizon. From then on, she'd greeted him before he'd come more than 20 feet into the field. This morning, though, Zeb called her name over and over. He made it all the way to the creek bed. He tried to stay calm, to tell himself that she was all right. But the breath that had been catching in his throat on the way here now seemed to vanish altogether. No air. His throat was dry, his tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. Sammy. The name was almost a sob. He could not say what caught his ear. The wind was still blowing, the grasses rasping against each other, the dead summer leaves of the stunted trees rattling against the hard blue ceiling of the sky. But he spun, dropped to his belly, and held his breath. Sammy, he whispered. There, again, something weak, something desperate. But the weeds danced around him, taking the cry and tossing it from stem to stem. Sammy. Zeb crept forward on his knees, unmindful of the rocks and earth biting into his palms. He waved his hand slowly, gingerly ahead of him, terrified that he would miss her, or worse, land on her. He hadn't noticed the smell, but he recognized it now. Sammy smelled like the mornings at home smelled now. Dread choked him, and he fought the urge to run home, to run away, to run from what he knew lay ahead of him. But that piteous sound caught his ear again, and he crawled forward. She lay there in a bare patch of earth. Her yellow belly, smeared with brown, rose and fell rapidly as her pain-filled eyes fixed on his. He wished she hadn't seen him. He wished he hadn't seen her, but he couldn't look away now. It was as if she were holding his hand, clenching his fingers tight against her own. She opened her mouth, and that terrible sound came out. It wasn't until he scraped his hand over his face that he realized tears were streaming. He pulled off his t-shirt and wrapped it around her, cradled her against his chest, murmuring promises he already knew he couldn't keep. Sammy never took her eyes off his. He could feel her shuddering deep inside his own belly. He was shaking himself, but he tried to sound courageous for her. He walked as fast as he could without jarring her, both his arms clutching her to him as if he could share his heart with her. Daddy could fix her. Daddy could help her. Daddy had never even seen her, but he'd smiled when he'd given Zeb the cat food. Zeb knew that Daddy took care of people. He could take care of Sammy. Zeb should never have left her out here. He should have caught her, braved her claws and teeth, locked her up in the house, kept her safe. What did Mama know about cats anyway? He was stumped for a minute when he reached the gate, but then he bent himself, holding Sammy as gently as he could, and folded them both between the bars. Sammy made another sound, softer than before. Her eyes were still fixed on his, but they were drooping now. Zeb thought maybe she could rest now that she knew he was going to help her. The quarter mile to the house seemed to take forever. Warm droplets of sweat gathered on his shoulder blades and rolled slowly down his back. He did not look away from Sammy, his eyes catching the toes of his sneakers as they came into view behind the cat's head, striking the dusty road and sliding back out of view. With every step, she seemed to weigh heavier and heavier in his arms. "It's okay, Sammy. It's okay. I've got you." He repeated the words over and over till they had no meaning, even to him. The wind chimes were still ringing when he reached the front porch, but Zeb didn't hear them. "Daddy!" he shouted as loudly as he dared, not wanting to startle Sammy. "Daddy, help me!" The screen door banged open, and Daddy came bursting out, Mama fast behind him. Zeb saw Daddy take him in with a glance. Just then, Sammy convulsed in his arms, bile running out of her mouth and soaking the shirt she was wrapped in. "Daddy!" he screamed. Daddy swept the bundle out of Zeb's arms and spun away, heading into the backyard. "Susan, get him inside," he barked. Mama reached for him, but Zeb twisted away, crying in earnest now. "Daddy, you have to save her." "Susan!" Daddy roared. His blue plaid back disappeared around the corner of the house. "Zeb, please." Mama caught him this time and lifted him into the house as if he were still only 5 instead of 6. He fought her, but she wrapped around him, carrying him to the couch and pressing him against the cushions with all her weight till his sobs subsided and he sagged into the couch. "Mama, what's Daddy gonna do?" His mother's face was still tight against his bare chest, and he could feel the warmth of her tears against his skin. "Honey, Daddy can't fix everything." "But she's just sick. She needs help. She can get better." Zeb could feel his mother shuddering against him. Tentatively, he reached out and stroked her brown hair. "Mama?" "She was a good cat, Zeb. She was a good friend to you, and you were a good friend to her. But she can't stay forever, no matter how much you want her to." "Why not?" Zeb heard the screen door creak open and drop closed, but he did not hear his father's footsteps coming into the house. From Grandpa's bedroom, the television blared a rerun of a crime show. Zeb could smell the cleaning chemicals, the faint undertone of decay that no amount of Mr. Clean and Febreze could dispel. Mama was breathing slower now, her hand pushing back his hair gently from his forehead, but she kept her head down. He knew she didn't want him to see her crying, knew she was trying to stop. "Mama, get up. Daddy's back." Mama shook her head, but before she could say anything, he had wriggled out from beneath her and run into the kitchen. He stopped suddenly, strangely aware of his dangling arms and not knowing what to do with them. His heart seemed to beat too loudly, his breath noisy and brash in the sweltering silence. The kitchen outside beat against the house, but in here, nothing moved. Daddy was leaning against the wall, right by the door where he'd just come in. His face was gray, and he looked as old as Grandpa. His eyes were closed, and Zeb was afraid to speak for fear Daddy would fall down. He'd never seen him look so weak. Daddy's shirt was covered in filth and blood from Sammy, but his arms were empty. Zeb stared at Daddy's eyelids. He could see the creases, the lines that spangled out from the corner of Daddy's eyes and stretched toward his hairline. He could see the dusky lashes trembling against the brown skin. He could see something wet and gleaming trace a path to Daddy's chin. Zeb clenched his fists, his heart impossibly pounding louder and faster. Daddy didn't cry. Daddy never cried. He yelled, he laughed, he bellowed, he roared, but he never cried. Those lashes shook, lifted. Daddy looked past Zeb at Mama, standing just behind him. It was too late. She must have been dying when he found her. She's already gone. Mama's hand gripped Zeb's shoulder, and she pulled him tightly back against her. "No, Daddy, no. She's just sick. She needs help. We can help her, right, Daddy?" Daddy sank down to the ground, his knees against his chest. He rubbed his big hand across his forehead. "I'm sorry, Zeb. I'm real sorry." But his eyes were still looking at Mama. "Some things we just can't fix. You have to let her go. The truth is, she's already gone." Mama made a strange sound and pulled away from Zeb, disappearing behind him. Zeb stood there, trembling till he could barely stand, as if the kitchen were a vast, cold world instead of a tiny, hot, wallpapered room. Daddy looked at him, finally, and opened his arms. Zeb moved jerkily toward that refuge, feeling every movement as a jar that rattled him to his core. Daddy's arms closed around him, his bulky, muscular arms and soft belly so different from Mama's wiry, desperate embrace. You did good, Zeb. Sometimes you can't save 'em. All you can do is love 'em till they're gone. Zeb burrowed deep into Daddy's shirt and closed his eyes, not wanting to open them again if Sammy was gone. Do you think she knew, Daddy? Knew what? Daddy sounded very tired. Knew we were trying to help her. Oh, she knew, son. She knew. She might not have understood what was happening, but even the simplest heart knows what love feels like. Zeb lay there a long time, listening to the steady pounding of Daddy's heartbeat until his own slowed. He could still hear the television, but no matter how his ears strained, he could not hear his mother's footsteps. The house seemed to be listening too, waiting for those brisk, light feet that were never still. I miss Grandpa, Daddy. I do too, son. I do too. From Twenty Bellows, We Are the West, the EMBERS anthology. Thank you for listening.